Good evening, you tired traveler of screens and responsibilities. You have found your way to a softer kind of story, the kind that doesn't demand anything from you except a slow breath and a willingness to drift. Right now, your day can stay outside the door, tapping its foot with a clipboard of worries. Inside, you get something older than stress, warm mist, green shadows, and a world that doesn't know what an email is. In the present moment of the dream, you stand before a fern forest so lush it feels impossible, as if someone painted ancient with a brush dipped in emerald. Fronds hang overhead like chandeliers made of rain, and the air glows with soft, filtered light. Even the silence seems layered, velvety, alive. And yes, tiny reality check. You probably wouldn't survive this in real life, not because something jumps out to eat you, but because you'd miss clean water, modern medicine, and the comforting lie that nature comes with safety instructions. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop your location and let me know how your day has really been, your worries, your exhaustion, or even a tiny joy that made you smile. I'm here to truly listen and offer the most sincere, heartfelt advice I can. Now, turn off the lights, take a deep, slow breath, let your tiredness melt away, and gently close your eyes. Let's drift together into tonight's dreamlike lands. And tomorrow morning, if you still remember, send me a message and tell me what you dreamed. You do, at least in your mind, and your mind is the only vehicle that can handle this trip. The room around you thins out like fog, and the air changes texture. It becomes warm, damp, and richly scented. Soil after rain, crushed leaf, a hint of resin. Antarctica, in this distant age, is not a continent of ice. It is a temperate world draped in green, sitting near the pole under long seasonal light. You stand at the forest's edge, where the ground is springy and dark, a carpet of moss and decaying fronds built up into something soft enough to forgive your steps. Shallow pools collect in depressions, reflecting broken pieces of canopy, like a mosaic that shifts whenever you move. You step in, and the forest receives you. Tree ferns rise like columns, their trunks patterned and fibrous, their crowns opening in patient spirals. Beneath them, smaller ferns layer the understory in endless greens. Droplets gather at leaf tips and fall one by one, as if the place keeps time in quiet clicks. A hidden stream murmurs somewhere under roots. You hear it the way you hear a distant fan at night, steady, soft, hypnotic. The humidity presses gently against your skin, warm enough to feel like a blanket. Your shoulders loosen without asking your permission. Your jaw, which has been clenching all day like it's trying to hold the universe together, finally lets go. You brush your fingertips along a trunk as you pass. The bark is cool and damp, textured with old scars and pale lichen. A thin film of moisture comes away on your skin, and you notice the simple fact of being here, touching something that has never been named in your language, in a place your own era imagines as endless white. You look up through gaps in the canopy. The sun sits at an odd angle, unhurried, willing to linger. Near the poles, daylight can stretch in slow, generous seasons, and this forest has learned how to live with it. Growth here is not frantic, it is confident. A warm gust stirs the fronds overhead. The canopy shivers, not like panic, but like a creature adjusting its posture. Tiny spores lift into the air, fine as dust, glowing gold in the light, and drift around you. You inhale without thinking. Then you remember your modern caution, and you almost worry. Almost. The air is too gentle, and your eyelids are too heavy for alarm. In this place, even vigilance becomes sleepy. As you walk deeper, the forest begins to reveal its small bedtime details. Threads of spider silk stretch between stems, jeweled with dew. Fallen logs become soft architecture, moss, fungi, and dark, rich soil doing their quiet work. Broad leaves catch light like polished glass. The scent changes as you pass pockets of conifer-like needles and resin, adding a clean sharpness under all the wet green sweetness. Your pace slows until it matches the rhythm of dripping water. You notice your breathing syncing with it. In, out, in, out. Each step is quieter. Each thought becomes less urgent. Your mind, which normally runs like a crowded station, starts turning off lights in empty rooms. Still, there is a thin thread of awareness running through you. Not fear, just respect. You are in a world that is both familiar and impossible. Antarctica under ferns, warmth near the pole, a living roof of green where you expected ice. You take another step, and something shifts in the undergrowth ahead, subtle, careful, like a presence deciding whether you belong. You don't chase it, you don't demand proof. You simply keep walking, letting the fern cathedrals open aisle after aisle before you, until the forest feels less like a place you entered and more like a place that has been quietly expecting you. You keep moving, and the forest begins to feel less like scenery and more like a system, an ancient engine that runs on water, light, and time, with no hurry and no apology. Under your feet, the ground isn't just dirt, it's layers, old fronds, softened bark, compacted moss, and the dark, sweet-smelling compost of centuries. Each step presses down and rebounds, as if the earth itself is breathing with you. At first, you try to carry your modern instincts into the greenery. You look for trails that make sense. You look for signs that someone has been here before. You search for the kind of order your era loves, straight lines, clear borders, helpful warnings. The forest responds by offering none of that. Instead, it gives you repeating patterns: fern, trunk, fern, shadow, like a lullaby that refuses to end the verse where you want it to. And slowly, you realize that this place does have order. It just doesn't care if you recognize it. The light is the first clue. It behaves differently than it would in a temperate forest you know. It stays longer, sliding across the canopy with an unhurried angle, lingering at the edges of leaves so everything seems softly backlit. The shadows are gentle and stretched, as though the sun has learned patience. In your world, you're used to daylight snapping from morning to noon to evening like a set of appointments. Here, time feels wide. It feels like it has room. You pause near a stand of plants that look like a mix between palm fronds and something older, cycads, thick and sturdy, their leaves radiating outward like green fireworks frozen mid-bloom. They have the stubborn confidence of survivors. They don't sway much in the breeze, they endure it. Their trunks are squat and patterned, storing the memory of seasons. Nearby, conifer-like trees rise with darker needles, adding depth to the green. You catch the scent of resin, warm and clean, like the forest's version of medicine. It sticks faintly in your nose, and for a moment it reminds you of something from childhood, maybe a pencil sharpened too eagerly, maybe the first time you opened a new book and smelled the glue. Your mind tries to translate this ancient smell into modern categories, and then gives up because the forest is not interested in being reduced. A small stream crosses your path, narrow but persistent. The water is clear enough that you can see pebbles beneath it, smooth stones, dark and shining like wet glass. You crouch and dip your fingers in. The chill surprises you, not painfully, but sharply enough to wake up one corner of your attention. The air may be warm, but this is still a polar world. The water carries a coolness from deeper places, shaded and slow. You watch the stream flow around roots like it's been doing this forever, which, in a way, it has. The roots themselves are a kind of map, thick and ropey, spreading and interlacing. Some rise above the soil like knuckles, making the ground uneven in a way that forces you to look where you step. The forest is quietly training you to be present. As you stand, a soft rain begins. Not a storm, not even a real weather event, just a fine drizzle that seems to appear from nowhere. It slides through fronds and gathers at leaf tips, then drops in slow musical beads. The sound is delicate, repetitive, soothing. You realize that in a place like this, it doesn't have to start raining. Moisture simply shifts forms, mist to drizzle, drizzle to drip, drip to stream. You walk on, and the forest seems to deepen. The air grows heavier with scent, damp wood, crushed fern, fungal sweetness. Somewhere nearby, something decays, and the smell is not unpleasant. It's the smell of recycling, of life rearranging itself. The modern part of you wants to call it rot. The older part of you knows it as continuity. You catch yourself thinking again about Antarctica, the word itself carrying ice, wind, and white emptiness. You almost laugh at how wrong that picture is for this era. In this time, the continent wears green like a cloak. It is not the frozen end of the world. It is a quiet, thriving place that your future will misremember. You tilt your head toward the sky again. Through the canopy, the sun still hangs in a position that feels off. Not wrong, just strange. It's the angle of a world arranged differently. Continents shifted, oceans reshaped, climates redistributed. The light feels slightly softer, as though the atmosphere is thicker, holding warmth and moisture close. You can feel it on your skin, this humid embrace that makes breathing slower. You continue, and you begin to notice the subtle signs of adaptation. Leaves are broad and layered to catch light during long seasons. Plants grow in dense, overlapping structures to retain moisture. Fallen fronds aren't wasted, they become bedding for new growth. Nothing here is extra. Everything serves the forest's steady economy. And then you notice something else. The quiet is not empty. It is full of small sounds that your ears are only now learning to separate. A faint rustle in the undergrowth, a soft click of water falling, the whisper of fronds brushing each other. Somewhere, a low, distant call, so deep it feels more like vibration than sound. Your chest responds to it before your brain does, the way it might respond to a bass note in music. You stop walking without deciding to. Your body stills because some instinct, older than language, has noticed movement that is not plant or weather. A disturbance at the edge of your vision. Not a lunge, not a threat. Something careful, watching. You breathe in slowly. The damp air fills you. You breathe out, and your exhale looks nothing in this warm world. No white plume, no proof, just a quiet release. You take a step forward, then another, and you do it in a way that feels respectful, as if you are entering someone's home, because you are. And as the fern forest continues to unfold in endless green rooms, you sense more clearly now that you are not exploring alone. You are being observed, measured, and perhaps, if you keep your calm, accepted. You stand still long enough that the forest starts moving again around you, as if it had paused out of courtesy. The drizzle continues its patient work, beating on frond tips and falling in slow clicks. The stream keeps threading through roots. Somewhere far off, that low vibration sounds again, one long, deep note that seems to travel through the damp air and settle in your ribs. You take a step, and your boot presses into a patch of dark, soft ground where the compost is turned almost silky. When you lift your foot, the impression remains. Clean edges. A shallow basin of water gathers at the heel. The forest remembers you immediately. And then you notice it. A second set of impressions, not yours, runs alongside your path. They are older by minutes, not days, still crisp, still holding their shape. The soil around them hasn't collapsed yet. A thin sheen of moisture glitters in the hollows. Whoever made them passed through recently, unbothered by the same uneven roots that slowed you down. You crouch, and your knees sink slightly into moss. The prints are not paw marks, not clawed, not the deep, heavy stamp you'd expect from the giant herbivores you have only sensed in the distance. These are narrower, purposeful. The spacing suggests a gait that knows where it's going. You trace one edge with your finger and feel how the soil gives, how it clings. Your brain tries to do what it always does: name, categorize, decide. Human, animal, danger, safe. But the forest isn't offering the kind of evidence your modern mind likes. No crisp textbook diagram, no neat label, just a line of footprints vanishing into green shadow, and the unmistakable feeling that you are late to a meeting you didn't know you had. You stand slowly, because sudden movement feels rude here, the way loud laughter feels rude in a library. Your eyes scan the understory. Ferns overlap in layers, each one a curtain. Mist hangs in pockets, turning distance into watercolor. Anything could be watching from behind those fronds, and your imagination takes the opportunity to audition worst-case scenarios with enthusiastic commitment. A soft shift comes from your left, not a snap, not a crash, a controlled rustle, like someone carefully moving a sleeve through leaves. You look, and you see nothing but the bowing of a few fronds, the way they settle back into place as if they've been brushed aside. You turn your head slightly, listening. The forest answers with tiny noises that could be wind, could be insects, could be your own pulse. Then, from somewhere behind you, a quiet click of stone against stone. A small sound, intentional. Your shoulders lift a fraction before you force them to relax again. This is the point where the sensible version of you would turn around, march back to the edge of the forest, and file a complaint with reality. But you are not in a sensible place. You are in ancient Antarctica, warm and green, and you've already accepted that your internal map is out of date by tens of millions of years. It would be oddly inconsistent to draw the line at someone else is here. You move forward again, slower now. Your steps become softer, more deliberate. You place your foot where the ground looks stable, where roots won't betray you. You follow the line of footprints without stepping directly into them, the way you might avoid walking on someone's freshly swept floor. As you go, you begin noticing other signs that you missed when you were busy marveling at the impossibility of ferns under polar light. A branch has been snapped and laid at an angle, pointing the direction you're already headed. Not fallen naturally, placed. A smear of resin marks a tree trunk at shoulder height, glossy even in the drizzle. It looks like a small curved stroke, repeated again on another trunk a few meters ahead, as if the forest has been annotated. You pause beside the second mark and bring your nose close. The resin smells bright and sharp, like clean sap and old sunlight. It is fresh enough to still be tacky. Whoever made these marks is not only nearby, they are active, moving, organizing space. A ridiculous thought drifts through your mind, slow and sleepy. You have wandered into someone's carefully managed trail system, and you didn't even bring a gift, not even a snack, just your weary modern self and the audacity to exist. You pass a fallen log whose top has been cleared of moss in a narrow strip, exposing darker wood beneath. The strip is smooth, rubbed clean, like a bench used often. Near it, 3 stones sit in a small triangle, each one placed on purpose rather than scattered by water. In the center of the triangle rests a fist-sized chunk of pale mineral, chalky and bright against the dark earth. You don't touch it. Something in you understands that this is not trash. This is a message, or a marker, or an offering. You don't know to whom. You simply respect it. The forest seems to tighten around you as you proceed, not in a threatening way, more like a crowd leaning in to see what happens next. The air feels warmer in one pocket, cooler in the next. Mist curls around your ankles. Spores drift through a beam of light and disappear, as if swallowed. Then, you see them. Not fully, not clearly, but unmistakably. A shape in the ferns ahead, upright and still, like a trunk that learned to breathe. It is partially hidden, but the symmetry is wrong for a plant. A second shape shifts behind it, lower, smaller. A third is only a suggestion, an absence where leaves should be moving, a silence where you expected rustling. You stop again. Your heart doesn't race so much as it carefully checks in, like a cautious colleague. The part of you that wants to survive clears its throat. The part of you that wants to keep dreaming tells it to sit down. A gleam appears between two fronds, an eye catching light, then vanishing. Another gleam, not predatory, curious, measuring. The watchers are close enough that you can sense their presence more than see them, like you sense someone standing behind you in a quiet room. You take one slow breath in. The humidity fills you. You breathe out, and your exhale joins the mist without drama. You keep your hands visible, relaxed at your sides, because even in a dream, body language matters. You angle your posture slightly away, giving space, signaling that you are not here to chase or corner anything. The shapes do not flee. They simply remain. The forest holds them, and they hold the forest. Another tiny sound, the soft press of a foot into wet soil, matching the prints you've been following. Then a second, farther back, completing the sense of a loose circle forming around you. Not a trap, not yet, just a cautious boundary. You realize with a strange, calm certainty that you have crossed from wandering into being witnessed. You are no longer alone with your thoughts and the dripping canopy. You are sharing the fern-lit world with locals who know every root and stream bend, who leave resin marks like quiet handwriting, and watch you the way you might watch a newcomer in your neighborhood, patiently, silently, deciding what you are. And in that decision, in that suspended moment of being observed, the forest feels even older, even more alive, because it isn't only plants and weather anymore. It has community. It has eyes. You don't make the first big move because the forest has already taught you that rushing is the fastest way to get humbled. You simply stand there in the warm mist, letting your breathing stay slow and obvious, as if you're demonstrating the concept of calm to an audience that doesn't need lessons. The shapes in the ferns shift. A frond bows aside with careful control, not torn, not snapped, moved like a curtain drawn with two fingers. And then one of the locals steps into clearer view. They are not dressed in the way your mind expects ancient to look. There is no dramatic costume, no theatrical animal skull, no convenient museum label. Their clothing is made of layered plant fiber and softened bark, woven into panels that drape rather than cling. It's practical. It breathes. It blends with the palette of the forest. Deep greens, muted browns, the occasional pale strip like lichen. Their skin and hair are damp with the air, and their posture is balanced, grounded, like someone who has spent a lifetime walking on roots without stumbling. They do not speak. They do not even perform the exaggerated friendliness your modern world sometimes mistakes for warmth. Instead, they offer you something quieter, a pause, a moment that feels like permission. The local's eyes move over you with the slow efficiency of someone taking inventory. Your hands, your shoulders, your stance, your gaze. They register that you are not charging forward, not grabbing at the resin marks, not touching the pale mineral in the stone triangle. Your restraint seems to matter. Another local steps out behind the first, shorter, older perhaps, with a heavier wrap across the shoulders. A third remains partly hidden, but you sense them there as surely as you sense the trunk of a tree beside you. The circle that had been implied becomes a soft perimeter, not closing in, just holding shape. The first local shifts their weight and lifts one hand, palm angled downward. Not a wave, not a threat, a signal. Their fingers move in a slow, gentle sweep toward the ground, then forward, an invitation to lower your energy, to follow. You understand, not through language, but through the body's ancient ability to read other bodies. You respond by letting your shoulders drop even more. You soften your knees. You make yourself slightly smaller without crouching, as if to say, I know I am the awkward newcomer here. I will not pretend otherwise. The local turns, and you notice a small detail that makes the scene feel suddenly intimate. A strand of woven cord around their wrist holds a bead of hardened resin, amber gold, catching the light. It is the same resin you smelled on the trunks, the same glossy marks. This is their trail language carried with them. They begin to walk, not away from you, not fleeing, just moving with confidence, assuming you will follow. The second local glances back once, not with suspicion, but with the calm check of a guide confirming you're still there. You take your first step after them, careful and quiet, and the forest accepts the sound of your movement as if it has been waiting to incorporate it. You follow along a path that isn't obvious until you're on it. The ground subtly changes, fewer tangled roots, more compacted soil, a faintly worn line where moss is thinner. The locals have been walking this route for a long time, and their footsteps have pressed a gentle memory into the earth. Every so often, you spot another resin arc, now meaningful. A curved stroke indicates a turn, a double mark suggests a crossing. A thicker smear appears near a shallow stream, and the first local pauses there. They crouch, scoop water with a broad leaf, and lift it, not to their mouth, not in a dramatic gesture, but simply to show you the water is safe. They set the leaf down and continue. You understand what you're being offered, a practical welcome, not ceremonial, not performative, the kind that says, you can walk with us, you can drink where we drink, you can learn our way of moving through this place without breaking it. You step around the stream and feel the coolness rise from it. The humidity clings to your skin like a warm cloak. Your hair, if you had any sense of hair in this dream body, would be damp and obedient. Even your thoughts feel slower, softened by the rhythm of following. The path leads you through a corridor of tree ferns whose trunks stand close together. Their fronds arc overhead, creating a vaulted ceiling. Light filters through in broken beams, and spores drift in those beams like tiny floating stars. It is oddly cathedral-like, except no one is asking you to believe in anything. You're simply here, breathing, walking. The locals' movements are efficient and quiet. They step where the ground holds. They avoid snapping fronds. When they brush past leaves, they do it gently so the plant springs back intact. Watching them, you realize how loud your normal way of moving is, not just physically, but spiritually. You barge through your days. You push. You force. You get things done. Here, survival seems to be built on cooperation with the environment, not conquest of it. A small stop occurs without announcement. The group halts near a cluster of cycads and low conifers. The air smells more resinous here, cleaner, sharper. The first local kneels and draws something from a pouch at his side, a small bundle of dried fronds tied with fiber cord. They place it on a flat stone, then press their palm lightly to the stone beside it. It could be a greeting ritual. It could be a simple habit. It could be an offering to the forest itself, a quiet acknowledgement that they are taking space, using resources, existing. Whatever it is, the gesture is small and sincere. You don't mimic it exactly because copying without understanding can be its own kind of disrespect. Instead, you do something simpler. You place your own palm on the damp earth for a moment. You feel the coolness, the softness, the living, layered ground. You let yourself be part of it for one slow breath. When you lift your hand, there's a faint imprint, quickly darkened by moisture. The forest remembers you again. The second local watches this and makes the smallest shift, an easing in the shoulders, a subtle softening around the eyes. Not applause, not approval, just the quiet signal that you have done something acceptable. The group moves again, and now you notice that your fear, if it was ever truly indicated, has become something else. Curiosity, yes. Awe, certainly. But also the strange comfort of being guided by people who know where they're going, who don't need to explain it in words. You walk with them as if you've always belonged behind this slow, steady procession. Your steps become quieter, your breathing stays low, your mind stops trying to anticipate 10 threats at once. And in the green hush of ancient Antarctica, under fern ceilings and drifting spores, you are welcomed the way the forest welcomes rain, without drama, without questions, simply folding you into its rhythm. You follow the locals as the path subtly changes character, like a song shifting to a new verse without stopping. The canopy opens in places, letting wider sheets of light spill down. The understory grows thicker with plants that look edible, broad fronds with tender tips, clustered shoots, thickened roots pushing up from the damp earth. The air becomes slightly less misty here, replaced by a steady humidity that feels like warm breath held close. The first local leads you to a stand of conifer-like trees, where resin beads along the bark in small amber tears. They pause and rest a hand against a trunk, fingers splayed, as if checking for something you can't see. Then they reach to a shallow cut in the bark, old, healed at the edges, and collect a small amount of resin with a thin strip of wood. It is careful work, and you can tell immediately that the tree is not being harmed. The incision is shallow, controlled, not the kind of greedy gash that would kill a plant for short-term gain. This is harvesting with memory. This is taking in a way that assumes you will return and need the tree again. The local rolls the resin between their fingers, then presses it onto a small flat piece of bark, creating a tacky patch. They hold it out, not as a dramatic gift, but as a functional offer. The message is clear. This substance matters here. It is part of their day. You take it with the same steady restraint you've been practicing. The resin is warm from their hand, sticky and fragrant. You bring it close and inhale. The scent is sharp, clean, and strangely comforting, like antiseptic without the chemical bite, like a forest's own way of saying, you can keep going. You notice how they use it next. The second local kneels by a thin sapling and applies resin to a fiber cord wrapped around a small tool, securing the binding so it won't loosen in damp weather. The third local, still mostly quiet and half hidden, uses resin to seal a seam in a woven container, pressing it into the fibers until it hardens into a waterproof skin. You look down at your own modern body, and you almost laugh at how unprepared it is for this place. You've come here with nothing but curiosity, while they carry a whole technology built from trees, fronds, and patience. The path continues to a low area where the ground is darker and richer, the soil almost black. Here the ferns grow differently, shorter, more densely packed, their tips curled in tight spirals. The locals slow down, and you sense that this is one of their harvesting places. They do not rip plants out. They pinch, they cut, they choose. The first local selects a few young fern tips, fiddleheads, snapping them cleanly with a practiced motion. The plant remains rooted, ready to keep growing. They gather only from certain clusters, leaving others untouched. It is a pattern of restraint that feels almost ceremonial, though it is clearly just the logic of survival in a world where waste is a kind of insult. The collected spores dust the trays like golden flour. The first local covers them with a thin layer of leaf, shielding them from drizzle, and you realize that this might be part of their food, mixed into pastes, thickening soups, adding nutrients. It's humble, but it's clever. It's using what the forest gives freely in abundance, rather than hunting for something rare. The notion of livelihood shifts in your mind. In your world, livelihood often means deadlines, paychecks, and the constant low-level fear that your usefulness will expire. Here, livelihood is simply the set of daily practices that keep the community fed and warm. It's practical, yes, but it's also gentle. No one here seems to be racing. The forest's pace sets the schedule. They lead you to a small clearing where the ground is drier and the light is stronger. You see something like a workspace, flat stones arranged in a line, logs set as seats, a shallow pit ringed with rocks, evidence of controlled fire. Nearby, strips of bark hang from a branch, drying. Bundles of fronds are tied and stacked. Everything is organized, but not sterile. It's the kind of order that comes from repeated use. The second local demonstrates fiber work. They take a strip of softened bark and twist it, rolling it against their thigh to form cord. The motion is fluid, efficient. They splice another strip seamlessly, creating longer lengths. Then they bind the cord around a tool handle and seal it with resin. The tool might be for cutting, digging, scraping. Simple, but perfectly adapted. You are invited to help, not with a dramatic gesture, but by being placed near a pile of fronds that need sorting. You pick them up and feel the different textures, some stiff and mature, some soft and pliable. You choose the younger ones, remembering how they harvested only certain tips. You align them neatly. You tie a bundle as best you can with fiber cord, aware that your knots are embarrassingly modern and not nearly as efficient. Still, no one corrects you with impatience. The first local watches, then gently adjusts one loop of your cord, tightening it, securing it. The correction is silent and kind. You feel a warmth in your chest that has nothing to do with the humid air, the simple relief of being taught without being judged. As the work continues, the forest around you feels less like a wild unknown and more like a shared home. The resin scent lingers, spores drift through sunlight, water murmurs beyond roots. The locals move with quiet purpose, and you find your own body matching their rhythm. Slow hands, soft steps, attentive eyes. In this fern forest at the bottom of the world, you are learning a different kind of competence, not the frantic competence of modern life, but the calm competence of knowing what matters: food, shelter, community, and the steady kindness of doing things the right way, even when no one is watching. You move on from the little workspace without any formal ending, because here the day doesn't get chopped into tasks the way your modern life does. Work flows into walking, walking flows into tending, tending flows into rest. The locals gather what they need: bundles of fronds, a small pouch of spores, a smear of resin sealed on bark, and then they simply start moving again, as if the forest itself has scheduled the next stop. The air changes first. It grows warmer in a way that isn't just humidity anymore. The warmth has direction, rising from somewhere ahead, threaded through the trunks like a secret. You catch it in your nostrils, mineral, slightly metallic, like stones after rain, but deeper, older. The scent rides on the damp breeze and makes your shoulders loosen another notch, which is impressive because you already arrived half unraveled. The path narrows, then dips. Ferns crowd closer, their fronds brushing your arms with soft insistence, as if they're checking that you're still real. The ground becomes slicker underfoot, not with mud, but with a thin film of moisture that seems to sweat from the earth. Your steps slow, naturally careful. The locals glide over it with practiced ease, placing their feet where traction hides. You hear it before you see it, a low, steady bubbling, gentle as a pot kept at the smallest simmer. It's not loud. It's the kind of sound that makes your brain immediately label it as safe, familiar, warm water doing warm water things. Then the ferns open and the springs reveal themselves. A shallow pool spreads across dark stone, steaming lightly in the cool breath of the surrounding forest. The water is clear, but the rocks beneath it are stained with mineral colors: rusty reds, pale creams, charcoal streaks, like the earth has been painting very slowly for a very long time. Small rivulets run off the main pool into narrower channels, forming warm streams that snake between roots and disappear under moss. The locals pause at the edge without theatrics. Their movements become slower, softer, like entering a place that deserves a quieter body. One of them touches a resin bead at their wrist, then presses their fingertips to the stone near the water. Another sets the woven reed basket down on a dry patch of ground, careful to keep it away from the steam. You understand, again without words, that this place is both useful and respected. A practical ritual begins. They rinse their hands first, slowly, thoroughly, letting the warm water run over fingers and wrists as if washing away not only dirt, but the day's tiny tensions. The second local gathers smooth stones from the pool's edge, holds them under the water until they warm, then places them in a shallow hollow in the rock nearby. The stones steam faintly, becoming portable warmth for later. Nothing is wasted, not even heat. You kneel at the water's edge and dip your fingertips in. The warmth surprises you in the most soothing way, sliding into your skin like a promise. It's not scalding, it's body-friendly, the kind of temperature that makes you exhale without realizing you were holding your breath. You scoop some into your palms and press it to your face, and the heat spreads across your cheeks, down your jaw, into the stubborn muscles near your ears that you didn't even know were clenched. For a moment, you almost feel guilty, because this is exactly the sort of luxury your modern mind would try to monetize: a wellness experience, a premium retreat, a limited time offer. Here, it's just warm water, and the only requirement is respect. The locals shift to cleansing in a way that is both communal and private. They do not stare at one another. No one performs. They simply move with quiet confidence, loosening woven wraps, stepping into the shallower edges of the pool, rinsing skin and hair with gentle repetition. One of them takes a bundle of softened fronds and uses it like a brush, sweeping water across shoulders and arms to lift away soil. Another uses a pinch of pale mineral crumbled into the water to scrub hands and forearms, a simple abrasive that leaves the skin feeling clean without harshness. You notice that the resin isn't only for tools. One local warms a small smear of it between their fingers, then applies it lightly to a small scrape on their knee, sealing it, protecting it, keeping damp from turning it into a problem. It's done with the same calm attention you've seen all day. Not panic, not neglect, just steady care. When you follow their example, you do it carefully, without mimicking every gesture. You rinse your hands, then your arms. You let warm water run over the back of your neck. The forest's dampness, which once felt heavy, now feels like something you belong in. Your breathing slows further, deepening. The sound of bubbling becomes a metronome. Above you, through the canopy, the light persists. It's an odd thing to feel, a day that doesn't quite end the way your body expects. The sun's presence is gentler now, lower, but it lingers, refusing to fully leave. The polar rhythm of this ancient world stretches daylight like taffy. It's the kind of light that can confuse a modern nervous system that's trained to collapse into sleep only when darkness gives permission. And yet, here, rest is not negotiated with night, it's chosen. After cleansing, the locals move to the warmer stones they set aside. They pick them up carefully, testing them against their palms, then wrap them in layers of leaf and fiber to hold the heat. One bundle goes into the reed basket, another is tucked against a hip beneath woven layers, portable comfort for later, like a small ancient version of a hot water bottle. You feel a quiet admiration at how tenderness is engineered into their day without anyone calling it self-care. They guide you to a nearby resting area, a slightly raised patch of ground that stays drier, sheltered by the arch of tree ferns. The forest floor here is layered with soft materials, dried fronds arranged like bedding, moss pressed into thick mats, strips of bark forming a windbreak against any cooler drafts. It is not a camp in the dramatic sense. It's more like a nest that has been maintained over time, refreshed, repaired. You lower yourself onto it, and your body instantly understands. The bedding gives, supports, cradles. The warmth of the springs lingers in your skin. The air remains damp, but not cold. A faint resin scent floats from nearby tools and cords, clean and reassuring. One of the locals sets a warmed stone bundle near your feet, not touching you, just placing it within reach. The gesture is so simple, it almost hurts your heart a little bit. The quiet proof that you're included, that your comfort matters, even though you arrived with nothing but confusion and a suspiciously modern sense of entitlement. You lie back and look up through fern fronds, watching the light filter down in soft bands. Spores drift lazily in the air, catching the last stretched brightness. The bubbling of the spring becomes steadier in your ears, less like sound and more like a blanket. Your thoughts try to rise, lists, plans, worries, but each one is met with warmth, with softness, with the persistent daylight that says time is not chasing you here. You remember the earlier warning that you probably wouldn't survive this, and maybe that's true in a practical sense. But in this moment, resting under a midnight sun that refuses to hurry, you suspect the deeper truth is simpler. The part of you that's exhausted was never meant to survive the way you've been living anyway. So you let your eyes grow heavy, you let the fern canopy hold your gaze, you let the warm stone near your feet radiate its slow kindness. And the ancient Antarctic day continues, unbothered by clocks, while you drift toward sleep in full, lingering light. You rise when the locals rise, not because anyone tells you to, but because the whole little shelter seems to shift from stillness into motion. It's subtle, a roll of shoulders, a quiet tightening of wraps, hands checking cords and baskets. The warm stone bundle near your feet has cooled to a gentle warmth, like the last breath of a small fire. You tuck it back where it belongs with the same care they showed you, and you follow as they slip back into the forest. The light is still there, soft, stretched, persistent. If you try to guess the hour, your brain fumbles. In your world, you'd rely on a clock, or at least the sun's position. Here, the sun behaves like it has nowhere else to be. It lingers, drifts, refuses to fully commit to setting. You could call it confusing. You could also call it generous. The path carries you away from the warm springs and into denser green. The air cools slightly, returning to that steady, humid comfort. The forest's scents reassert themselves: damp earth, crushed fern, clean resin. Your body feels calmer than it has any right to feel, considering you're an uninvited guest in deep time. But calm is contagious. The locals move like people who know exactly what the day requires, and your nervous system, relieved to outsource control, follows their certainty. You begin hearing heavier sounds as you travel: low thuds, faint cracking, the slow drag of something large shifting weight. At first, it could be distant trees creaking in wind, but the rhythm is wrong for wood. It has breath to it. It has intention. The locals slow down. The first one lifts a hand, not abrupt, not sharp, just a gentle pause. You stop. The forest ahead seems to open into a broader corridor where the canopy thins and the understory is trampled into a wide, worn path. The ground here is pressed flat, the moss rubbed away in long swaths, and the scent changes, a warm animal musk mixing with the green. Your chest tightens once, then loosens again, because the locals aren't alarmed. They are attentive, yes, but not afraid. This tells you everything. Whatever is ahead is not a monster, it is a neighbor. You step forward carefully until you can see through the ferns into the clearing beyond. They are there. Massive herbivores move through the green like slow weather, huge bodies, thick legs, long necks rising above the fern canopy as if the forest itself has decided to stand up and look around. Their skin is textured, matte, not shiny, patterned in subtle earthy tones that blend with trunks and shadow. Their movements are unhurried. Each step compresses the ground with weight that makes the earth answer in a soft, deep sound. They are not rushing. They are not hunting. They are feeding. One of them lowers its head toward a stand of cycads and strips leaves with steady precision. Another swings its tail slowly, not as a weapon, but as a balancing counterweight to its own enormous body. A smaller one, still large by any sane definition, lingers closer to the edge of the clearing, nudging at fern clusters, pulling tender fronds and chewing with patient repetition. Your mind tries to process scale. Your body tries to remember that you are technically edible in the sense that you are made of organic material. But herbivores aren't interested in you as food. Their danger comes from indifference. If one decides to walk through the space you occupy, you will become a brief inconvenience in its journey. The locals demonstrate the rules without words. The first local moves slightly to the side, placing themselves where they have a clear view but remain partially screened by ferns. The second lowers their stance, making their silhouette smaller, less startling. The third stays back, holding the reed basket close, not because the animals would steal it, but because sudden swinging shapes can catch attention. You mirror what you can. You shift behind a tree fern trunk, using it as a polite barrier. You keep your movements slow and minimal. You resist the urge to raise your hands dramatically, resist the urge to stare too intensely. In your world, staring is curiosity. In many worlds, staring is a challenge. You decide not to be rude to a creature the size of a moving hill. The largest animal in view lifts its head. Its neck rises in a long, elegant arc, and for a moment it holds still, chewing slowly. Its gaze drifts across the clearing, not sharp, not predatory, more like a scanning, indifferent awareness. When its eyes pass your area, your breath catches, not because you feel hunted, but because being seen by something so ancient and immense makes you feel small in a way that is strangely soothing. The animal's gaze does not lock on you. It does not react. It simply continues chewing and then lowers its head again, returning to its quiet task of being alive. The locals exhale almost imperceptibly, and you realize you've been holding your breath like an idiot. You let it out slowly, careful not to make sudden noise. The forest accepts your exhale. You continue to observe, guided by the locals' calm. They seem to treat the herd like part of the landscape, respected, monitored, given space, but not dramatized. They know the paths the animals prefer. They know where to stand. They know how to wait. And waiting is what you do. You let time widen again. You let the herd move through. You watch them feed, shift, swallow, step. It's hypnotic. Their presence turns the clearing into a slow-moving scene of strength without aggression, power without panic. One of the smaller animals wanders closer to the edge of the clearing. It steps toward the screen of ferns and pauses, sniffing. The sound it makes is soft, air moving through a large body. It nudges at the leaves, strips a few, chews. Its tail flicks lazily. It is close enough now that you can see the subtle texture of its skin, the way moisture beads along ridges, the way its nostrils flare gently with breath. You feel a deep, primal awe. You also feel a practical instruction forming inside you. Do not be in its way. The first local shifts position slightly, guiding you back along the fern-lined corridor by a few steps, not retreating in fear, adjusting in respect. You follow without resistance. You stay screened. You keep your body quiet. The smaller animal loses interest at the edge and wanders back toward the center, drawn by better foliage. The herd begins to drift as a unit, turning slowly, stepping along their pressed path. Each footfall leaves a shallow impression that will fill with drizzle later, becoming tiny pools that insects and plants will use. Even their movement reshapes the forest in ways that sustain it. When the last of the giants have moved on, the locals don't rush forward. They wait an extra beat, because patience is safety. Then the first local touches a reed bead at their wrist, an absent, habitual motion, before leading you along a parallel route that skirts the herd's trail. As you walk, you glance back once, watching the long necks dissolve into fern shadow. The clearing returns to green quiet, but it feels changed, like you've just watched a secret heartbeat of the world. You realize that in this forest, the locals don't dominate the giants, and the giants don't dominate them. They coexist, they adjust, they share roots and resources without pretending they own the land. It's a kind of balance your modern life rarely offers. And as you follow your silent hosts back into the fern cathedral, you carry that balance with you, softly, like warmth held in a stone bundle, radiating calm into the spaces inside you that have been bracing for impact for too long. You return with them to the familiar clearing, and the shift from out there to in here feels immediate, like stepping from wind into a room. Fern walls still surround you. Drizzle still ticks on fronds, but the ground is compacted and purposeful. Flat stones sit in a line. A shallow fire pit waits, ringed with rocks that remember heat. The locals set down baskets and bundles with the quiet seriousness of people who intend to eat well, not quickly. No one announces a mealtime. It simply begins. One sorts the harvest, curled fern tips, pale roots, fungus pieces, a pinch of golden spores kept dry under leaf. Another nudges ash aside, checking the pit. A third brings dry bark strips and twig bundles from the forest edge, gathered with restraint. No tearing, no greedy stripping, just enough. Fire here is treated like water, useful, dangerous, respected. They build it small, coaxing it rather than commanding it. Bark fibers nest together, a spark happens without drama, and a soft flame breathes into life. Smoke rises thin and resin-scented, curling into the canopy as if it's asking permission to exist. Cooking begins with stones. Flat slabs are warmed near the coals. A rounded stone is set directly into the heat to store warmth. The second local scrapes the roots clean with a simple tool bound in resin and fiber. Scrape, turn, rinse in a leaf cup, set aside, until they look smooth and pale, ready to sweeten over stone heat. The first local cuts fern tips and softer greens into lengths that will cook evenly, arranging them on a broad leaf with calm precision. The third pinches the dried fungus into smaller bits, then mixes it with the golden spores. You recognize the spore flower you watched them gather, and you feel a quiet respect for how they use abundance instead of chasing rarity. A basin-like vessel, dark, heat-stained, settles near the fire where it will warm without cracking. Water is poured in from leaf and gourd-like container. Greens go in first, then fungus and spores, then a sliver of pale mineral that dissolves slowly. Salt, but not the careless kind. This is salt that has been carried, guarded, portioned with thought. Roots are laid on the warmed slabs. They hiss faintly, polite as everything else in this place. The smell rises, earthy sweetness from roasting starch, green brightness from warming fronds, deep savor from fungus, a whisper of smoke. Your stomach answers with embarrassingly modern enthusiasm. Awe is excellent, but it doesn't keep you fed. The eating space forms without ceremony. A log becomes a seat, a flat stone becomes a table. Leaf bowls appear, folded and shaped with nimble hands. One bowl is placed near you, not pushed or presented, simply set down as if it has always belonged there. Gratitude shows up in your chest like a small, stubborn weight. You watch how they share. No one hoards. Portions are adjusted with attention. The older one receives softer greens and hotter broth. The one with the scraped knee receives thicker stew. Another gets more root, less salt. You realize fairness here is not sameness, it's suitability. Before eating, there is a pause, not staged, just shared stillness. Fingers touch the rim of a bowl. A palm rests briefly against the earth. Someone taps the resin bead at their wrist, that small reminder that the forest is relationship. You join in your own way. You hold your bowl, let warmth seep into your hands, lower your gaze, and release one slow breath. It feels like signing your name on a quiet agreement. You eat. The stew is gentle but layered, green and mineral, slightly smoky, thickened with spores that give it body. The fern tastes like something between spinach and asparagus, but softer, wilder. The fungus adds depth that makes your brain briefly forget categories and accept nourishment. The roasted roots are sweet and nutty, edges browned against the stone. A tiny pinch of salt brightens everything, and you understand why they treat it like treasure. No one speaks, and without words the meal feels oddly intimate. You hear chewing, the soft set-down of a stone tool, the fire breathing, drizzle tapping overhead, the stream murmuring under roots. You notice your own pace slowing until each swallow matches the rhythm of the clearing. You take smaller bites. You stop when you're satisfied. You don't reach for more out of habit. That, you sense, is part of the etiquette. Take what you need, leave space for the world to keep giving. When bowls empty, the closing is as gentle as the beginning. Leaf bowls are rinsed and laid to dry. Small scraps are gathered and set aside, some for compost, some for fire. The vessel is cleaned carefully, treated like a tool that deserves care because it keeps life possible. You sit a moment longer with warmth in your belly and fern shadow drifting above you, and you realize the comfort isn't only the food. It's the way the locals fold you into their rhythm without making you perform, without making you prove you deserve kindness. You are simply fed, and in this ancient Antarctic green, that steadiness feels like the forest caring for you through their hands. When the last leaf bowl is rinsed and laid out, the clearing doesn't collapse into after. It simply shifts. Hands that were feeding you a moment ago begin arranging the space with a different kind of intention. The fire is kept low, more ember than flame. The reed baskets are retied. The resin bead at the wrist is checked as if it's a compass, and a few bundles of fronds are set aside with unusual care. Cleaner, straighter, chosen for beauty as much as function. You notice the air changing again, and this time it isn't temperature, it's density. In the shafts of light filtering through the fern canopy, there's a new glitter, fine dust floating, catching brightness, turning the air into something gently golden. You blink, and it keeps drifting. You inhale, and you taste it faintly. Dry, vegetal, almost sweet. Your modern brain immediately tries to be helpful in the worst way, offering the word pollen with the same tone it uses for problem. Yes, this is the part where you realize your body, with its soft city lungs, is about to experience nature's version of confetti. You're guided out of the workspace and onto a path that feels more traveled than the others, not pressed hard like the herd corridor, but smoothed by many careful feet. Resin marks on trunks appear more frequently here, as if the forest itself is being gently underlined. Double strokes, short arcs, a thick smear near a stream crossing. You understand now that these aren't just directions, they're invitations. As you walk, the pollen thickens in pockets. It swirls at ankle height where the air is still, then lifts and tumbles in slow spirals when a warm breeze finds it. The canopy above holds it like a ceiling holds smoke. Every time sunlight breaks through, the particles glow as if the forest is full of tiny, drifting lanterns. The locals' posture changes in response. Their movements slow even more, not from caution, but from attention. One of them taps their resin bead, then presses fingertips to a trunk where a fresh mark shines. Another brushes pollen from their forearm with a soft frond, not irritated, just acknowledging it. This is not an inconvenience to them. This is an event. The path opens into a broad glade where cycads and conifer-like trees stand with a kind of ceremonial spacing, their crowns arranged so the light falls in wide, warm sheets. The ground is drier here, layered with old needles and fern litter that cushions each step. The air hums, not with insects, but with the subtle sound of motion. Pollen drifting, fronds brushing, leaves turning in gentle drafts. And you were not alone anymore in the small way you've been alone with your guides. Figures move through the glade from several directions, other locals, carrying reed baskets, bark panels, bundles of dried fronds. They arrive quietly, merging into the space as if they've always been here, as if this gathering is not a special occasion, but a returning rhythm in the years-long breath. No one announces themselves. Recognition happens through posture, through the angle of a head, through a hand briefly touching a shoulder and then moving on. You feel that slight, sleepy awe again, the sense of stepping into community without being asked to perform it by performing. The center of the glade is marked not by a platform or a shrine, but a simple arrangement: flat stones set in a loose ring, a shallow basin carved into darker rock, and a low rack of branches where strips of bark hang like blank pages. Pollen gathers on everything here, dusting surfaces in a faint gold that makes even plain stone look touched by light. The ritual, if you can call it that, begins with gathering the drift. The locals hold out broad leaves and let pollen settle into them. They use fronds as fans, guiding the dust into shallow trays, not chasing it, just cooperating with the air. Some collect it from the conifer's lower branches where it has accumulated in soft piles. The process is quiet and steady, like making flour, like preparing a meal for the eyes. You're guided to a spot near the bark panels. One of the locals places a leaf tray in your hands. The gesture is simple, and yet it lands in you like trust. You stand very still and let the pollen fall, watching it accumulate in a thin golden layer. Your palms tingle slightly through the leaf, not from heat, but from the feeling of participating in something you don't fully understand. Nearby, a local warms a small smear of resin between their fingers, then mixes it with pollen on a flat stone. The resin turns tacky, the pollen turns paste, and suddenly you're watching paint being made from the forest itself, amber glue and golden dust. They spread it in thin lines across bark panels with a small carved stick, creating patterns that echo fern spirals, stream bends, and the gentle arcs of resin trail marks. Others press actual fronds onto bark, using the resin pollen paste like adhesive, layering greens on browns, building relief and shadow. Some sprinkle dry pollen over wet resin lines so it clings like metallic powder. The effect is soft and luminous, not gaudy, more like the forest has decided to illustrate itself. Your guides move among the work, not supervising, just flowing. The first local, your first clear face in this world, places a small bark strip in front of you, already brushed with a faint resin sheen. They set down a little pile of pollen beside it and a thin stick shaped to a point. It is the closest thing to being asked a question, and you answer with your hands. You dip the stick into pollen and draw gently into the resin. The lines appear as you move, gold on amber on bark. You don't try to copy their symbols exactly. You draw what you felt: a tall fern crown like an umbrella of green, a warm spring pool, the slow curve of a giant herbivore's neck disappearing into shadow. Your line wobbles once, and you almost tense because your modern life has trained you to fear imperfection. Then you look around and you realize nobody here is grading you. The art is not about correctness, it's about participation, about noticing, about leaving a small, respectful trace that says, "I was here, and I saw the world, and I didn't try to own it." As the bark panels fill, the locals begin placing them along the stone ring, propping them so the light catches their golden dust. The glade becomes a gallery made of forest materials, lit by a sun that refuses to rush. Pollen continues to drift through the air, and sometimes it lands on the fresh resin lines, adding shimmer without anyone touching it. The environment collaborates. Even the wind contributes. A second practice unfolds at the basin in the center. Offerings, but not in the heavy, dramatic sense. Small bundles of dried fronds are tied with fiber cord and sealed with resin. A few warmed stones, heated earlier at the springs and carried like quiet comfort, are placed near the basin's rim, releasing gentle heat into the air as if to encourage the pollen to rise. Some locals drop a pinch of pollen into the basin water and watch it spread in faint clouds, turning the surface briefly gold before it clears again. You feel a sleepy tenderness in it all. Nothing is wasted. Nothing is screamed. The EFTA festival is simply the community acknowledging a season when the air itself is fertile with possibility, when the forest sends its future out as dust on the wind. And yes, your nose tickles. Your modern sinuses attempt a minor rebellion. You resist the urge to sneeze like a cannon. You press your tongue lightly to the roof of your mouth and breathe through the smallest, calmest channels you can manage, because the only thing worse than being the newcomer is being the newcomer who detonates loudly in the middle of someone else's sacred drift. As the light slowly shifts, barely, gently, the locals begin to gather the finished bark panels and hang some of them from branches around the glade. They sway slightly in the warm air, golden lines catching and losing brightness like memories moving in and out of focus. You step back with your own small bark panel in your hands, resin tacky at the edges, pollen dusting your fingertips. Your guides glance at it, not judging, just seeing, and the second local makes that subtle softening again, the almost smile that lives in shoulders and breath rather than in lips. The pollen continues to fall, and you understand with a calm certainty that this is how they mark time, not with numbers, not with alarms, but with the changing behavior of air and light, with the forest's own messages written in gold dust and quiet hands. The glade slowly loosens its gathered feeling, not with an ending, but with a quiet thinning, hands lowering, bark panels swaying softly on branches, pollen drifting into less concentrated air. Your fingertips remain dusted gold, resin tacky at the edges of your little tannel, and you carry it the way you carry a warm cup when you're half asleep, carefully, like it could spill your calm if you jostle it. Your guides begin to move first, and the rest of the locals fold into motion behind and around them. Some collect trays and leaf bowls, some retie bundles, some press fresh resin marks on trunk and stone, leaving the forest annotated for those who come after. The fire, if there was one here at all, stays low, more warmth than flame, because in this place, drama is not a fuel source. You follow, and the air still glitters for a while, pollen catching light in slow spirals. Then the path dips into thicker fern corridors, where the sun's beams break into narrower strands. The gold dust fades behind you, and the forest returns to its usual palette: deep green, wet brown, resin amber, shadow. At first, it's just a change in touch. A cooler finger of air slides along your forearms. The humidity remains, but the warmth that had been rising from the ground and pooling under the canopy thins out. You notice the locals responding before you fully register why. Their wraps shift higher on shoulders. Their steps become more deliberate. One of them checks the reed basket straps and tightens a knot. Another presses their palm to a trunk where a resin mark shines, as if confirming a root. The sun is still present, still stubbornly lingering in this polar season, but its warmth feels less secure now, like a lamp behind a frosted window. The angle changes by a fraction, and suddenly the light isn't doing as much work. You remember, with a small internal sigh, that this is still Antarctica. Even in an era of green, the continent knows how to pull a trick. Wind arrives without announcing itself. It doesn't roar, it threads. It slips through the fern crowns and makes them shiver. It moves along the understory and turns spores and pollen into restless little eddies. It finds the damp on your skin and cools it. That's the part that gets you. Warmth you didn't realize you were relying on, quietly removed. Then the fog begins. At first, it's only a softening at the edges, distance turning watercolor again. The trunks ahead lose sharpness. The far fronds blur into one green mass. The forest's depth feels shallower, as if someone has moved the background closer for your comfort, which would be lovely, except your comfort is not the fog's goal. The mist thickens in pockets, pooling low like a living thing that prefers valleys and dips. When the path drops, the fog is already waiting there, fat and pale, rolling around roots. It curls around your ankles, then rises to your knees. The drizzle that had been a gentle tick becomes a finer, colder veil, still not violent, but insistent. The locals slow to a pace that is almost meditative. You sense the shift in them, quiet alertness, not fear. The first local lifts a hand in a small downward motion. Stay low, stay calm, stay with the shape of the group. They reorganize without words. One walks slightly ahead, setting a rhythm. Another stays near you, not touching, but close enough that if you drift, you will feel the absence. The third keeps the basket and bundles centered, protected. Their spacing becomes a practical web, designed to hold everyone in visibility, even as the forest tries to erase distance. You try to help by doing the most useful thing you can do. You become predictable. You shorten your stride so you don't lurch forward. You keep your hands close to your body so you don't snag fronds in the fog. You watch the ground more than the canopy because your feet are now your most reliable truth. The path isn't just worn, it's written in texture. Compacted soil, fewer roots, moss rubbed thin. You learn to read it like Braille. A sound changes too. The forest's small noises get muffled, absorbed by fog. The drip-click of water becomes softer. Even your breathing sounds louder to you, like you're inside a hood. You take slower breaths and keep them quiet. You do not want to be the person who hyperventilates in the middle of ancient Antarctica's gentle weather tantrum. The cool air finally triggers the thing you've been avoiding. Your breath becomes visible, faintly, a whisper of white that hangs for a second and dissolves. It's the first truly icy reminder. The continent clears its throat and says politely, "Do not get smug." You notice the locals using simple tools against the fog's disorientation. They touch resin marks more frequently, confirming turns. They break a small frond and lay it at an angle on the path, subtle but readable to those trained to notice. One of them produces a warmed stone bundle from their wrap, now only mildly warm, and presses it into their palm as they walk. Heat as reassurance, heat as focus. You feel an absurd appreciation for that earlier kindness. The warmed stone you tucked back at the springs wasn't just comfort, it was preparedness. It was their way of living with changing weather. Carry calm with you, literally. The fog thickens again as the path crosses near a stream. Water vapor rises and mingles with the cooler air, and suddenly visibility drops to a few meters. Trunks appear, then vanish. Fern crowns become dark silhouettes overhead. The world reduces itself to immediate textures: wet bark, slick earth, damp fiber wraps against skin. For a brief moment, you lose sight of the first local's shoulders. The fog swallows them like a curtain. Your chest tightens, small, sharp, because your modern brain loves a good panic rehearsal. But then you see the resin gleam on a trunk just ahead, fresh and glossy, and the second local shifts slightly closer to your side, re-establishing the group's shape. The message is quiet but firm. The forest can blur, but the community holds. You continue, step by careful step, while the weather performs its slow escalation. The drizzle cools into something finer and colder, beading on your eyelashes, gathering at your jaw. The wind threads again, turning the fog into moving walls. Your skin feels chilled under the damp, not dangerous yet, just uncomfortable enough to remind you that wandering off would be a terrible idea. And that is the problem forming, gentle as it is serious. In fog like this, the forest can steal direction without violence. It can make 2 steps feel like 20. It can make a familiar trunk look like a new one. It can make you confident until you're wrong. You stay close. You keep your pace. You watch for the resin handwriting on bark and the careful placement of broken fronds. You let your attention narrow to what matters: the next footfall, the next mark, the next shape of your silent hosts moving steadily through pale air. Ahead, the fog deepens into a thicker corridor where even the light begins to dim, and you feel the forest drawing the world in tighter around you, softly, quietly, testing whether you can remain connected when everything looks the same. You keep close. You match their pace, watch for the resin handwriting on bark, and read the path by feel. Compacted soil under the center, roots pushed to the sides, moss rubbed thin where many careful feet pass. Fog keeps rearranging itself into soft walls, and drizzle keeps stippling your face with cold patience. Everything in you knows the rule now: stay connected. Then a gust threads through the fern crowns and pushes the fog sideways, like a curtain pulled across a stage. For a heartbeat, the first local silhouette blurs. You take one quick step to keep them in view, just one, and your boot lands on slick moss stretched over a root. The moss slides. You wobble, catch yourself on a damp trunk, and taste that sharp metallic edge of adrenaline. By the time you straighten and look up again, the fog has thickened in exactly the wrong place. Their shapes are gone. Not vanished like magic, just swallowed by pale, moving air that turns distance into nothing. You stare, blinking, waiting for a shoulder to reappear, for a reed basket outline, for anything. The forest answers with drip, 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 as if moisture is the only reliable schedule here. Your first impulse is to call out. You don't. You've learned how sound behaves in this mist. It gets eaten. And words aren't part of this place's rhythm. So you do the quieter thing. You read. You place your fingertips on the nearest trunk and search for the tacky gloss of resin, cool bark, wet lichen. Then there, faint but real, a fresh smear, a shallow curve, not a clear arrow, just a suggestion. You follow it with your eyes to the next trunk and find another curve a few meters ahead. Confirmation. The trail language is still speaking, even if your guides have slipped out of sight. You move forward with smaller steps, weight centered, as if you're trying not to offend the ground. Ferns overlap like repeated pages, and fog makes every trunk look like every other trunk. It would be easy to walk in confident circles and become a rumor. You slow down instead. Another marker appears, a broken frond laid at an angle on the path, placed too neatly to be accident. It points along the same bend as the resin curve. You turn gently, not sharply, and your shoulders loosen a fraction. 2 cues, then a third. The soil underfoot turns slightly firmer, less slick, a route used often. You listen as you walk because hearing survives where sight fails. Under the muffled hush, you separate layers, drizzle on leaf, drip into soil, and the faintest thread of moving water nearby. The stream matters. Water is the spine of this forest. Paths tend to respect it. Communities tend to orbit it. You angle toward the sound, careful not to abandon the markers. Scent helps too. In the fog, smells feel closer. A clean sharpness returns, resin from conifers, brighter than the wet green sweetness around you. You follow the resin note the way you might follow a dim hallway light, not sprinting, just orienting. You reach a low dip where mist pools thicker, turning the space into a white bowl. The ground softens at the edge, and your boot sinks slightly, cold water seeping in. Not dangerous yet, but enough to remind you that comfort is negotiable here. You step back to firmer earth and keep going. A dark shape forms ahead, heavier than fog. Your chest tightens for half a second because your mind loves drama. Then it resolves into a fallen log. Its top has a narrow strip rubbed clean of moss, smooth wood exposed beneath. A resting bench, a familiar sign. Relief warms through you, quiet as a held breath finally released. You slide your hand along the cleared strip and feel the polish of repeated use. Someone sits here. Someone waits here. Near the log, 3 stones sit in a small triangle, placed with intention, and in the center lies a pale mineral chip, bright against dark soil. The same punctuation you saw earlier. You are not in random wilderness. You are still inside their mapped world. But you are alone inside it. Loneliness arrives as a simple fact. No silhouettes ahead, no soft shoulder glances, no basket rustle. Just you, repeating greens, and fog that makes everything feel closer and farther at the same time. Your mind offers panic like it's being helpful. You let it rise for a breath, then you let it go. Panic is loud, and this place is built for quiet solutions. You choose a plan that fits the locals' logic. Stay where you are readable. Stay near markers. Stay near water. Stay in a place that says clearly someone can find you without needing miracles. You follow the stream's whisper until you see it, a narrow ribbon of dark water sliding between roots, steady and patient. You sit on a stable patch of ground a safe distance from the edge, wrap your arms around yourself for warmth, and keep your posture open, visible, not hidden. Fog drifts around your knees, fern crowns sway overhead in dim light. The stream murmurs like slow breathing. You hold your little resin and pollen panel against your chest, absurdly protective of it, as if that gold dust can anchor you to the day's memory. The warm springs, the shared meal, the festival air glittering like quiet stars. You become still. You become findable. And in the pale, familiar green, you let the world narrow down to one gentle truth at a time. You sit by the stream long enough that the cold begins to feel less like a surprise and more like a steady fact. Drizzle gathers at your hairline, slides down your temples, and disappears into your collar. The fog keeps moving in slow folds, thickening, thinning, then thickening again, as if the forest is breathing through a cloth. You keep your breathing low and even, not because you're fearless, but because you've learned the local math. Panic spends energy and buys you nothing. So you do the only sensible thing in an unsensible place. You stay readable. Your hands rest on your knees, your shoulders remain relaxed, not hunched into a defensive shell. You keep the little resin and pollen panel against your chest like a warm memory made solid, and you let the stream's sound anchor you. It murmurs along roots with the calm insistence of something that has never needed to prove itself. The fog makes time hard to measure. Minutes could be long, long could be short. The sun's position offers little help, its light reduced to a pale glow behind drifting whiteness. Your modern mind tries to check a clock it doesn't have, then gives up and returns to the only clocks available here: drip, breath, murmur. Then you notice something that isn't those. A scent shifts, cleaner, sharper, resin. Not the general resin presence of nearby conifers, but fresh resin, recently handled, warmed by fingers. It arrives like a thin line drawn through the damp air, and you lift your head slightly, more awake. A second cue follows, a soft, controlled rustle in the fern understory. Not random, not wind. The sound of careful movement, bodies passing leaves without snapping them, feet choosing firm ground. You hold still, not wanting to flood the moment with your own noise. A shape appears in the fog to your left, then fades as the mist thickens, then appears again closer. An upright silhouette, steady, familiar in posture even before your eyes can resolve detail. A second silhouette holds a slightly different rhythm, as if bearing weight at the hip. A third remains just outside the line of sight, present in the way the ferns bow a fraction and then settle. Your chest tightens once, and then loosens as if it had been waiting for permission to soften. The first local steps into clearer view near a trunk marked with fresh resin. Their wrap is darker with damp. Their hair clings slightly in the humidity, and on their wrist the small resin bead catches what little light the fog permits, amber against gray-green. That bead, which once looked like decoration, now reads like a signature. This is them. This is the same world you were welcomed into. This is not a random stranger. They do not rush toward you with frantic energy. They do not scold you with their eyes. They do not perform relief like a show. They simply arrive, as calmly as the stream arrives at its next bend, and their calm washes over you in a slow wave. The second local steps to the edge of the stream and crouches, not to drink, but to check the bank, confirming where you've been sitting, where the ground is stable. Their fingertips touch the mud lightly, reading it the way you read printed words. The third local places something on a stone a few paces away, a small bundle wrapped in leaf and fiber. Even from here you recognize it. Warmed stones, carried like portable comfort, like quiet preparedness. The message is plain without language. You did the right thing by staying put, and they came in the right way to bring you back. You stand slowly, letting your joints unfold without drama. The locals watch your movement the way a guide watches someone step onto a slippery path, not suspicious, just attentive. You resist the urge to over-apologize with gestures because you remember the etiquette you've been learning. Do not inflate the moment. Do not make yourself the center. Keep things practical. The first local lifts a hand, palm angled down, and makes a short, gentle sweep forward. Follow. But even that instruction is softened by their posture, by the fact that they're already turning toward the path as if this is simply the next natural step, not a correction. You take one step, then another, and you notice what they've done while finding you. The resin marks along the trunks near the stream are fresher now, brighter, more frequent, glossy strokes that create a clearer corridor through the fog. A broken frond lies at a precise angle where the ground splits around roots, guiding you toward the safer footing. A small stone sits atop a darker rock, an extra punctuation mark to catch the eye. They didn't just come get you, they rewrote the forest's message so you couldn't miss it. You feel the urge to shrink with embarrassment, your modern instinct that being helped must always come with shame. The forest doesn't support that instinct. The locals don't reinforce it. They treat your separation as a weather event, inconvenient, solvable, not personal. As you begin moving with them, the second local falls slightly behind and to your side, close enough that your peripheral vision always has a human shape to hold on to, but far enough to give you dignity. The third takes the front with the basket and bundles, keeping the group's center of gravity steady. The first leads, checking resin marks as they go, fingertips briefly touching the glossy strokes as if greeting them. You pass the cleared log bench again, and you realize it was never only a resting place. It is a known point, a node in their trail network, a place where someone can wait without being lost. The pale mineral chip in the stone triangle still sits bright at the center, quiet proof that this world expects people to move, to drift, to be found. Fog remains thick, but it feels less hostile now that you are inside a practiced formation. The local spacing creates a kind of moving shelter, an invisible structure that holds you. You match their pace, you step where they step, your boots find firmer soil more often, your breathing stays slow, guided by the rhythm of their footsteps. A warmed stone bundle is offered again, not pushed into your hands, just placed within reach as you walk. You take it and feel the gentle heat, faint but real, seeping into your palms. It's not enough to make you sweat. It's enough to remind your body that comfort exists even in cold fog. You hold it like a promise. As the path gradually rises, the fog thins by degrees. The pale curtain becomes a lighter veil. Fern silhouettes sharpen again into fronds. The sun's glow strengthens slightly, spreading through the canopy in soft bands. The drizzle becomes less icy, more familiar. And then, like a room coming back into focus, the familiar clearing appears through the ferns. Flat stones, the fire pit's ring, the organized bundles, the sense of human pattern inside wild green. Your shoulders drop, not because the danger was dramatic, but because being disoriented is exhausting in a quiet way. You step back into that known space with your silent hosts, warmed stone in hand, resin and pollen panel safe against your chest, and you realize something gentle and startling. You weren't rescued from the forest. You were returned to the rhythm you belong in tonight. The clearing holds you again like a familiar room, even though familiar in this world means something entirely different than it does back home. Flat stones sit where they should, bundles of fronds are stacked with quiet order, the fire ring is a patient circle of rock, and the air smells faintly of resin and damp bark. Your body registers the return before your mind does, shoulders lowering, breath deepening, the subtle unclenching behind your ribs. No one makes a big deal of what happened. No one turns your brief separation into a story with sharp edges. The locals move with the same steady practicality as before, because the weather is doing what weather does, and the correct response is preparation, not performance. The cold snap hasn't fully arrived, but it's close enough that everyone acts as if it already has. The drizzle is finer now, the wind more persistent, and the fog keeps flirting with thicker patches. The first local checks the direction of the breeze by lifting a frond and letting it sway. The second inspects the bedding area, pressing a palm into the layered fronds, assessing dampness. The third sets down the reed basket and begins sorting materials with a new urgency that still feels calm. Shelter making starts, and you're included immediately, not with a speech, not with a task assignment, but by being placed near a pile of bark strips and fiber cord as if the assumption is obvious. You have hands, therefore you help. A framework is built first. 2 upright branches are wedged into the ground and braced against a pair of tree fern trunks. Cross poles are tied in place with bark cord, their knots sealed with resin so they won't slip in damp air. The structure is low and slightly curved, designed to shed drizzle and resist wind without presenting a big surface to catch it. Everything about it whispers, "We have done this many times." The second local layers dried fronds over the frame like shingles. Each layer overlaps the one beneath it, guiding water away. Where the fronds are thinner, bark panels are added, flexible sheets peeled long ago and kept for this purpose, now placed with their natural curve facing outward to direct runoff. Resin is smeared along seams, pressed into fibers, making the whole shelter behave more like skin than like a pile of leaves. You find yourself tying cord, holding poles steady, handing over frond bundles at the right moment. Your knots are still clumsy compared to theirs, but you're learning. The first local corrects your tension once with a gentle twist of the wrist, showing you how to cinch without cutting into the fiber. You repeat it, better. No praise is given, because praise isn't the point. Function is. As the shelter grows, the clearing transforms into a compact, protected nook. The wind's threading becomes less noticeable inside the forming walls. Drizzle still makes sound on the outer layers, but it's now a soft patter rather than a cold insistence on your skin. The locals keep the structure close to the ground, leaving a narrow opening that can be covered with a hanging bark panel when needed. Inside, bedding is rebuilt with attention. Wet fronds are removed and set aside to dry near the fire ring. Fresh, dried fronds are laid down in thick layers. Moss mats are placed on top, pressed flat, then fluffed slightly to create pockets of air. Insulation made from softness. Woven reed mats are unrolled for extra separation from damp ground. The sheltered space begins to feel warm without heat, simply because it holds still air. Fire is coaxed again, kept small and controlled. The first local positions the pit so smoke is pulled away from the shelter opening by the wind's direction. Dry bark fibers nestle under twigs under thicker sticks, and a flame appears, small, steady, obedient. They feed it slowly, never letting it flare. The goal isn't a roaring blaze, it's a reliable core of warmth and dry air. You notice another layer of preparation, warmed stones. The second local places rounded stones close to the coals, turning them with a stick so they heat evenly without cracking. The third wraps older warmed stones in leaf and fiber, stacking them near the shelter's entrance like quiet supplies. The stones radiate heat later when the fire is smaller, when the wind is harsher. Comfort, planned. While the shelter takes shape, the weather proves the locals right. Fog thickens just beyond the clearing. Wind slides through the ferns and make them shiver. The light dims by degrees, not as a dramatic sunset, but as if the sky is slowly pulling a gray blanket over itself. The temperature drops another notch, and you feel the damp cooling your skin more aggressively now. But inside the shelter, the air remains calmer. You sit briefly on the newly layered bedding while the locals adjust the entrance panel. A bark sheet is hung like a door, secured at the top with cord, weighted at the bottom with smooth stones. It can swing inward and outward, sealing the opening when needed. It makes a soft, hollow sound when it moves, like wood against wood, like a quiet heartbeat. The first local checks the seams one last time, pressing resin into any place that might leak. Their hands moved with practiced tenderness, as if they're caring for something living. In a way, they are. This shelter isn't just a structure, it's a pocket of safety created by skill and repetition. It is community made physical. You take a turn at the fire, not because you're told, but because you notice the rhythm. Someone always tends it while others prepare. You feed a twig in gently, watch the flame accept it, then settle back. You turn a warming stone with a stick, careful. The heat on your face is small but comforting, and the contrast with the cold, damp air outside makes the shelter feel even more precious. The locals settle into a calm endurance. They dry cords near the fire. They check tools. They rewrap their shoulders. One of them, older, quieter, presses a warmed stone bundle against their chest and lets their eyes close for a moment, letting heat sink in like a slow medicine. You feel the temptation to narrate this as a hardship because your modern brain loves a story where discomfort becomes heroic. But here, discomfort is simply managed. The forest isn't an enemy. The weather isn't a villain. The response isn't bravery, it's competence. And as the cold snap continues to press its gentle threat against the fern world, you find yourself learning the most soothing lesson of the day. Safety doesn't have to be loud. Sometimes it's just layered fronds, resin-sealed seams, warmed stones, and quiet hands working together until the wind becomes background noise and the fog stays outside like a visitor who doesn't know the password. The shelter holds through the worst of the chill, the way a steady person holds a room without demanding attention. Wind keeps threading through the ferns outside, but inside, the low, resin-sealed nook, the air stays calmer. The fire is kept small, and the warmed stones do their slow work. Your body, which had been flirting with that tight, shivery discomfort, settles back toward ease. When the fog thins again, just enough that trunks regain their edges and the canopy's light becomes less gray, the locals begin moving with that quiet readiness that means it's time to travel. The weather hasn't ended because weather here doesn't behave like a TV forecast. It is simply shifted to something manageable. They pack without clutter. Fiber cords are tightened, tools are checked, the reed baskets are loaded with the day's essentials, a few dried frond bundles, a small pouch of spores, resin on bark, warmed stones wrapped for later. Your resin and pollen panel is tucked carefully against your chest, protected like an identity card in a world where identity is mostly posture and behavior. You follow as they lead you out along a different route, one that feels subtly downhill, drawn toward the sound you've learned to trust, moving water. At first, it's only a murmur through roots, then it becomes a clearer rush, steady and low, like a long breath released. The forest changes around water in ways your senses start to recognize. The air feels cooler and fresher. The ground becomes more compacted and less mossy. Plants shift, more reeds and low growth, fewer thick fern carpets. The smell carries a faint mineral edge. You reach the river, and it looks nothing like a polite stream. It is wide enough to matter, dark enough to look like it's holding secrets, and smooth in places where it slows, black glass sliding between banks of green. Where it bends, it catches faint light and becomes a ribbon of dull silver. Where it narrows around stones, it breaks into quiet chatter, and you hear the language of water changing from word to word. The locals pause at the bank as if greeting an old companion. One touches a resin mark on a trunk near the edge, thicker than usual, like a signature for this place. Another sets the basket down and checks the ground for stability. The third scans the water's surface, not with suspicion, but with attention, the way you might scan a street before crossing. You look down into the river and see your reflection in fragments, face softened by mist, hair damp, eyes calmer than they were when you arrived. Behind that reflection, you see stones beneath the surface, some smooth, some jagged. You also see tiny movements, flickers, ripples, quick darts. Life. The locals begin their work here with the same calm competence you've seen all day. Fishing is not a sport, it is a practice. A simple tool appears, a forked branch with a sharpened point bound tightly with fiber and sealed with resin. A spear, modest and well made. Another local holds a woven trap, a basket-like cylinder with a narrow opening, designed so small creatures can enter but struggle to exit. The weave is tight enough to hold, loose enough to let water pass. It is elegant in its simplicity. They don't wade in wildly. They choose a shallow bend where the current is slower. One steps into the water with careful placement, testing the bottom with a foot before shifting weight. The cold bites at their ankle, but they don't flinch. They simply adjust, moving with economy. Another local crouches at the bank and places the woven trap into a narrow channel where water funnels around roots. They wedge it with stones, ensuring it won't drift. Their hands work quickly but gently, as if they're placing something in a friend's home rather than in a wild river. You're guided to a flat rock where tools are being made and maintained. Here, the river's presence becomes part of their craft. Water rinses fibers. Water cools heated stone. Water carries away fine debris. The first local takes a thin strip of bark and splits it into narrower fibers with a small cutting tool. They twist the fibers into cord with that fluid thigh-rolling motion you've seen, then dip the cord briefly into the river to soften it before binding it around a tool handle. Resin is warmed between fingers and pressed into the binding. The resin seals and stiffens. The river cools it quickly, locking the work in place. A simple manufacturing line powered by patience. You sit and watch, and you feel an odd shift in your understanding. In your modern world, tools often arrive finished, boxed, anonymous. Here, every tool carries the memory of hands, the history of repairs, the knowledge of which tree fern trunk offered the right bark, which conifer gave the cleanest resin, which warmed stones kept fingers nimble in cold air. The locals begin scraping and shaping small pieces of dark stone, chips broken from a larger rock, edges honed with controlled strikes. No sparks fly theatrically. No grand invention moment occurs. It's refinement. A blade's edge is tested on bark. A point is checked against fiber. A dull spot is corrected. And each correction is quiet. You're invited again, not with words, but with placement. A small bundle of softened fiber is set near you. A strip of bark is placed beside it. The first local demonstrates once. Split, twist, roll, bind, then leaves the materials in your reach. You try. Your fingers fumble at first, slick with damp and residual resin. You split the bark unevenly. You twist fibers too tight, then too loose. The cord frays. You pause, breathe, and let the stream's steady sound reset your patience. You try again. This time, your split is cleaner, your twist more even. You roll the fiber against your thigh, feeling it tighten into something usable. You hold the cord up and notice with mild surprise that it holds shape. It is not beautiful, but it is real. The second local adjusts one strand with a small tug, refining it, and you understand that learning here happens through touch and correction, not through explanation. A ripple in the river catches attention. The local in the water shifts posture, spear poised. There is no sudden violence, only a swift, practiced movement, a plunge, a lift. A small fish breaks the surface, silver dark and wriggling, then is secured with calm hands. It's over quickly, respectfully. Food gained without cruelty. The fisher returns to the bank, and the fish is placed into a shallow leaf basin with water, kept fresh. Another fish arrives later, captured by the trap in the narrow channel. The trap did its quiet work while everyone else did theirs. Efficiency without fuss. The locals rinse their hands, wash tools, and set the catch aside. You notice how little waste there is in their process. Nothing is tossed thoughtlessly into the river. Fiber scraps are collected. Broken stone chips are saved for smaller tasks. Even dull resin smears are reused. The river glides on, black glass calm returning after each disturbance. It takes no offense. It simply continues, patient and steady, holding the forest's reflections and the community's survival in the same moving surface. As the work concludes, the group begins to travel along the riverbank. The path here is clearer, pressed earth, fewer roots, the ground shaped by water's long insistence. Ferns still loom, but the river corridor opens the world slightly, letting more light spill in. You walk beside your silent hosts with river sound in your ears, tool-making knowledge in your fingers, and the calm realization that this ancient Antarctic life is built not on conquering nature, but on listening to it closely enough that it offers you what you need. You keep to the riverbank for a while, letting the dark water do what it does best. Steady your thoughts by refusing to hurry. The path remains clearer here, pressed by long use and softened by damp earth, and the locals move with that same quiet certainty, not wandering now, but guiding. The air begins to shift again, not as sharply as the cold snap, but with a subtle thinning that suggests you're leaving the most sheltered heart of the fern forest. The canopy breaks more often. Light comes through in broader sheets. The undergrowth changes from tightly layered fronds into mixed patches, ferns still dominant, but interrupted by low conifers and stands of reed-like plants near the water's edge. Your body notices the difference the way it notices when a familiar song is nearing its last chorus. Nothing has ended yet, but something is preparing. The first local, the one with the resin bead at the wrist, checks a thicker mark on a trunk and then slows. The group's spacing changes, widening slightly as if the route ahead needs less protection from fog and more attention to terrain. The second local adjusts the reed basket straps, shifting weight higher. The third touches the bundle of warmed stones, now cooled but still kept, because habit is also a kind of safety. You follow, and your little resin and pollen panel presses lightly against your chest with each step, a quiet reminder of the glittering glade and the way your hands learn to leave a respectful trace. Your fingers still remember the twist of bark fiber, the tack of resin, the gentle correction at the edge of a knot. Your mind, which normally hoards experiences the way it hoards tabs in a browser, begins to narrow down to the few things that actually matter here. A bend in the river reveals a small rise of darker rock, and the locals turn away from the water for the first time in a while. They lead you up a slight incline where the ground firms beneath your feet. The forest opens into a modest clearing, not the communal workspace, not the festival glade, but something quieter, a place that feels like a threshold, tree ferns still frame the edges, but the center is dotted with stones that protrude like sleeping bags. Some are smooth and rounded, others are layered, fractured, and dark, as if the earth once cooled here in sheets. The air smells faintly mineral again. The drizzle is lighter. Fog lingers in the distance, but it doesn't pool here as thickly, as if the land itself resists being swallowed. The first local stops beside a flat rock that looks unusually clean, its surface brushed clear of moss. They kneel and rest their palm on it for a long moment. The second sets down the reed basket. The third stands slightly apart, scanning the perimeter with quiet attention, more out of habit than fear. You stand where you're placed, close enough to belong, far enough not to intrude, and you watch the locals begin a gentle kind of sorting, not of supplies exactly, but of meaning. The first local opens a small pouch and draws out a string of resin beads, each one slightly different in shape and clarity. The resin catches the light even under cloud-thin daylight, amber, honey, deep gold. You remember the way resin sealed their tools, healed the scrape, marked trees, and carried their trail language. Here it becomes something else, a token that holds the scent of conifers and the memory of hands. They separate one bead from the string with deliberate care. The action is small, but you can feel its weight. In your world, gifts often come with speeches, expectations, awkward gratitude performances. Here, the gift is simply placed. The first local sets the bead in your open palm, closing your fingers gently around it without pressing too hard. The resin is cool at first, then warms quickly against your skin. It smells clean and sharp, and for a second you see the whole day in a flash. The first footprint beside yours, the quiet welcome, the fern tip harvest, the warm springs, the pollen drifting like golden dust, the fog swallowing silhouettes, the quiet rescue, the shelter sealed with resin seams, the river's black glass glide. You close your hand around it and hold still, because you understand that stillness is the appropriate thank you. The second local offers another token, a small pressed frond, flattened and dried, its veins delicate as handwriting. It has been treated with resin along the stem so it won't crumble in damp air. They slide it into a folded bark sleeve, simple protection, and place it in your hand alongside the resin bead. The frond is light, almost nothing, and yet it carries the entire forest's shape in miniature, a fern cathedral reduced to a leaf. The third local, quieter and more peripheral until now, steps closer and places a smooth river stone into your palm. It is dark, rounded, and cool, with a faint sheen that catches light. It's the sort of stone you might skip across water if you weren't trying to be polite in a sacred time. Here, it feels like a piece of the river's steadiness, given to you as a portable anchor, like those warmed stones, but now meant for memory rather than heat. You hold all three, resin bead, pressed frond, river stone. Small things, practical things, things that don't shout. Your modern mind tries to label them as souvenirs, and then quickly realizes that souvenir is too shallow a word for what's happening here. These are not trinkets, they are parts of a relationship. The forest's resin, the forest's leaf, the river's water-worn patience. The locals begin to prepare the path again, and you sense, with a quiet ache, that this clearing is not only for giving, it is for parting. The first local turns slightly and gestures toward the stones scattered around the rise. They touch one of the darker layered rocks and then sweep their hand outward, palm down, as if indicating the ground beneath all of this. You follow the gesture with your mind and feel something stir, an image not of what is, but of what will be. This world will change. Warm fern forests will not stay warm forever. Light will shift. Oceans will rearrange. Ice will return with its slow, relentless certainty. The forests will fall, not in a dramatic apocalypse, but in long, quiet surrender to cooling air and shifting seasons. These leaves, these trunks, these resin tears will sink into mud and be covered. Pressure will turn softness into stone memory. The river's calm will one day be trapped in minerals. The pollen drift that glittered in the glade will be buried and forgotten, except for the faintest traces locked inside sediment. You look at the rock under your feet and suddenly feel the future hiding inside it, fossils as promises. Not promises of survival for you or even for them, but promises that the world remembers in its own way. Long after voices are gone, though there were none here tonight, long after footpaths are erased, the ground will keep receipts. The thought is strange and tender at once. It makes your chest feel full, the way it feels when you realize something beautiful is temporary and you are lucky to witness it anyway. The first local's gaze meets yours, not intense, not demanding, just present. Their posture says what words would usually say. You have been here with us. You have moved carefully. You have learned. Now you must go. You stand with the tokens in your hands and feel a soft heaviness behind your eyes, not from sadness exactly, but from the kind of gratitude that doesn't have an outlet. In your world, you might try to pay it back. Here, you can only carry it forward. The locals begin to walk again, and you follow, because following is how you honor the path they're giving you. The clearing slips behind you. The river sound fades slightly to one side. Ferns close in again, but not as tightly as before, more like a corridor leading outward. You keep the resin bead in your fist, the pressed frond protected in bark, the river stone resting in your palm, and you feel with each step that you're walking towards the edge of their world, not because they push you out, but because the dream itself is beginning to turn, gently, towards morning. You keep walking, and the path feels different now, not because the fern forest has changed, but because you have. One fist closes around a resin bead that smells like clean sap and old sunlight. The pressed frond rides inside its bark sleeve. The river stone rests in your palm with the quiet weight of patience. These small anchors pull your attention inward, keeping you steady as the world begins to loosen its grip. Your guides lead you along a corridor where tree ferns stand like familiar sentinels. The fog has thinned, but the air still carries dampness, and each frond holds a last bead of drizzle that drops with soft, deliberate timing. The sun remains stretched and pale. Light falls in long bands through the canopy, broken by leaves, gentle as breath against glass. The trail language appears one final time, a curved resin mark on a trunk, a double stroke near a stream crossing, a broken frond placed at a turn as neat as a bookmark. You realize this guidance is not only for you, It is for whoever drifts in the mist on another day, for whoever needs the forest to speak plainly when everything looks the same. Community here is written on bark. You pass the place where you first saw footprints beside yours. The ground is still springy with compost and moss, still eager to remember. Your impressions have blurred, filled by drizzle, softened back into earth. The other set is almost gone too, as if the forest is kindly erasing evidence that you were ever separate. You breathe in wet green and let yourself feel a simple relief. You are leaving without damage. The route bends toward water. You hear its low hush before you see it, and the river appears, dark, smooth, black glass sliding between roots. You remember sitting alone when fog turned the world into a white bowl. You remember how panic tried to take the microphone and how you refused it. You press your thumb to the cool river stone now, and its steadiness answers like a hand on your shoulder. A familiar resting node arrives, the fallen log with its narrow strip rubbed clean of moss. The triangle of stones still holds its pale mineral chip at the center, bright against dark ground, quietly insisting this is a place where lost people become found. Your guides pause without signaling. One palm rests on the cleared wood, then on the earth. Another fingers the resin bead at the wrist in a motion that suddenly looks like goodbye. You stand with them in the damp hush. Ferns sway above. Water murmurs under roots. Somewhere far off, something large moves, one of the giants perhaps, making the ground answer in a distant, slow thud. The world continues without asking you, and that fact is humbling in the best way. Then your guides move again, and you follow through a corridor that narrows and opens, like the forest breathing you toward its edge. Fronds grow less dense, conifers appear more often, wind moves more freely. Your breath feels cooler in your nose. You pass the warm springs without stopping, but memory flares, bubbling like a metronome, warmed stones tucked close, rest chosen under a sun that refused to hurry. You glance down at the tokens in your hands and understand their quiet logic. Resin for repair, frond for growth, stone for patience. The path rises slightly. The forest floor grows firmer, drips thin out. You catch a wider view of sky, pale and expansive, and it feels like stepping from a sheltered room into a hallway where the temperature is different. The fern cathedrals begin to thin behind you, and you sense the boundary before you see it. Your guides slow at that threshold. No one points dramatically. They simply stop and face the green behind you, offering their home a final moment of attention. You do the same. You look back into the fern-lit world where you were welcomed without words, taught without shame, fed without conditions, found without blame. You remember the spore flower dusting trays like gold. You remember resin sealing bindings and sealing skin. You remember pollen drift turning sunlight into gentle glitter. And you remember that cheeky truth from the beginning. You probably wouldn't survive this in real life. Then you quietly amend it. You wouldn't survive it by force. You survive it by softening. One of the locals steps forward and places their palm briefly against your upper arm. Light contact, warm through damp fiber. the first direct touch you have felt from them. It is not a command, it is a simple transfer of presence. You have been here, you are seen, you may go. The hand withdraws, the group shifts back a half step, creating space. The forest behind them seems to inhale, holding them close. The open sky ahead seems to exhale, inviting you onward. You take one slow step into that openness, then another, and you feel the dream's edges beginning to soften. Your guides turn back toward the green and begin walking away, their silhouettes quickly folded into ferns and mist. No one looks back with regret. Their farewell is built into the fact that they trusted you with their path and their tokens, and that is enough. You stand for one last beat, letting gratitude settle where worry used to live. Then you turn your face toward the pale, stretched sun and begin your quiet walk out of time, carrying the forest's calm the way they carry warmed stones, close, steady, and meant to last. You walk a little farther, and the air around you becomes simpler, as if the world is gently reducing itself to what you can comfortably carry. The fern shadows soften behind your eyelids. The river's black glass surface turns into a memory of calm movement, a long ribbon sliding through roots. In your palm, the stone stays cool. In your fingers, the resin bead warms until it feels like it belongs to you. Against your chest, the pressed frond rests in its bark sleeve, light enough that you almost forget it is there, until you remember what it holds: warm mist, dripping fronds, careful hands, and a kindness that never needed words. Your breathing slows again, and you notice how easily your shoulders drop when you stop trying to hold everything up. You do not have to solve tomorrow tonight. You do not have to replay your day like a courtroom drama. You only have to be here, letting ancient green fade softly into dark. The fern forest remains, somewhere in the folds of time, still growing, still dripping, still sending its tiny spores into shafts of pale light. Your guides remain there too, walking familiar paths, marking trunks with resin, setting stones where the lost can become found. And you, for a few soft moments, are allowed to keep their calm with you. Let your hands unclench. Let your jaw loosen. Let your thoughts drift like fog that finally stops insisting. If a worry tries to rise, you watch it pass as gently as a ripple on the river, and you return to the steady weight of the stone, the warm scent of resin, the feather-light frond. Now the scene dims. The last beads of drizzle fall. The canopy becomes shadow, and you float down into sleep, safe, quiet, and unhurried. End of story. Sweet dreams.